Okay, so let's have a quick lesson if you are struggling with your reading paper portion of the exam, which will be in paper 1 and will be based on the rubric for text and human experiences. You'll have 10 minutes reading time and 45 minutes working time for the reading paper portion of the exam. So the first thing you're going to do when they allow you to start reading is to go and read the questions. We read the questions first so that when we read the text, we look for the answer as we go and we hopefully don't have to go back and read it again. So for this text, the question is, how has the poet created a link between an individual and collective experience? And I go and have a look at how many marks it's worth, and I can see here that this has been designated 2 marks. Okay, so this poem is called Man on Wire, and here goes. He is suspended between 2 buildings, standing on something that shouldn't hold, but does. He pauses, soles placed evenly, and then he moves, painfully quick, once, twice. Each passing over is a life extinguished. The lightest of breezes could be his undoing, but with every crossing he is born again. From below, he is only a speck, a thin shadow, but to the congregated people, he is a dancing immortal. They throng as if waiting for news from him, from some word from the sky. He has nothing to offer them but this, his taunt body pitched against the void, where only those who touch it know the sweet burn of toying with one's life. Okay, so my initial reaction should be sifting through my brain for meaning to understand what the poem is about. In this case, it appears to be about a man on a tightrope, suspended somewhere high, and that is both probably literal and it will stand metaphorically for something, depending on how I interpret the poem. But I'm really only interested in my answer to my question. So I have to ascertain what the link between an individual and a collective experience is. So my first port of call is to understand or suggest in my own head what the actual experience is. Because I need to have an answer which defines my question. Right? So say I'm getting stuck here and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what this experience might be or what it might link to. So what I'm going to do is grab my set of reading paper cards, which you can all ask for, my rubric, my technique card, my example card, and my explanation card. I'm going to say, okay, they have to be asking me something to do with my rubric. So I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to say, okay, I can talk about individual and collective experiences. Right, that's the question. I could talk about human qualities. I could talk about emotions. I could talk about anomalies, paradoxes, or inconsistencies with behaviour, anomalies, paradoxes, and inconsistencies with motivation, or the role of storytelling. So I can sit here and go, well, I think perhaps with this one that my best bet is probably something to do with emotion, or I could do something to do with human behaviour, maybe an anomaly, paradox, or inconsistency. So then I go back to my poem and say, right, the experience here is literally walking on a wire, and that seems to, if I read through this again, have something to do with being born again each time he does it. This keeps coming up again, this idea of being some sort of godlike figure. So maybe metaphorically, I might say that it has something to do with overcoming earthly bounds. Or if we want in plain English, pushing the boundaries. Okay, and then I'd have to say to myself, if I wanted it to have something to do with emotion, then I might say it's got something to do with need or desire, or I could go with my anomalies, paradoxes and inconsistencies, and perhaps here I might go with a paradox, because it appears to me when I read it that it's a bit strange to have to almost come close to death in order to feel life. Okay, so I have, hopefully as quickly as possibly, come up in my head with what exactly I think this text is saying, or what experience I'm linking between these two people, or two groups, sorry, the individual and the collective. So my next step then, after I've considered my rubric if I got stuck on what I could possibly speak about, and I've come up with what I think the experience is to write my first sentence. Now you don't have to follow the structure that I'm going to set out for you. That's not necessarily the only way to get marks. It is a way, however, of making sure you are articulate and clear about what you are arguing and giving yourself something to prove and link back to. So what I would suggest you do is that your first sentence in your short answer questions is like a mini topic sentence, which specifically gives an answer to the question given. So my answer will be: the poet creates a link between the individual experience of tightrope walking and the collective need to feel alive. And if I want to say revealing a paradox in human behavior. Now I probably would have done enough had I just left off the revealing a paradox in human behavior part, because I could have gone to that later if need be. All right, so I've set up what I'm going to argue. Now my next step, I know, particularly after I've studied my cards, is that I need to do analysis. Analysis is a technique plus an example plus an explanation. Now if you look at any of the marking comments from Nessa from the last couple of years in the reading paper, pretty much the number of marks awarded will dictate how many examples you need to give and analyse. So I'm going to name a technique, I'm going to give an example of that technique, and I'm going to explain that technique. Now say I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I can't think of anything to say for poetry. Well, when you're studying at home, flip over your technique card and you will see on the back some commonly and often used techniques in poems, and then different text types as well. Okay. You can flip over what am I meant to do for my example. Literally, this is a written text, so you just directly quote from it. And then I have my explanation card. And I should know from all my study that my explanations are a suggestion about what the impact of that technique that you chose in that particular quote are on you. And it must be a combination of naming the technique, giving the example, and explaining that example. So I have a poem. And I have a question to answer where I've said that the individual experience is one and that it has the collective, a link to the collective as well. So my first job, 2 marks, I need 2 sets of TEs. So I'm going to go through this and say, okay, well, I'm going to find an example of the individual first, and then I'm going to find an example of the collective, and I want ones which link together so that I can make sure that I am proving the part that the question that they've asked me. So he's suspended. I quickly go through, probably not, that's just his experience. Very beautifully written, but it's just his experience. It's not helping me out too much. Each passing life is extinguished. Okay, so we're getting close to this life and death idea. With every crossing, he is born again. Okay, so now I'm getting to the idea that I said, this idea of finding life in almost dying. So I might go with that for my individual experience. Now I need to find a collective which links to that. So from below he's only a speck at the in shadow, but to the congregated people he's dancing immortal. Okay, I have a God-like idea there. Collective. Okay, they throng as if waiting for news from him, some word from the sky. Okay, that's also the collective. They throng. What an awesome word. So maybe I could do something there. He's nothing to offer them but this, his taunt body, pitched against the void, where only those who touch it know the sweet burn of toying with one's life. Okay, so I could do something there, but I'm getting a little more complicated with my argument and having to suggest something to do with them experiencing things vicariously, so that means through him, but then not really being able to experience. So I might just put that to the side and leave that for another day. So I have my quotes. Now I have to come up with some techniques. So I grab my technique card if I need to. They write metaphor, simile, imagery, repetition, symbolism. Do I have any of these? Doesn't mean the other ones don't exist too. So always think about your other techniques. But with every crossing, he is born again. I say, well, that's a metaphor. He's not actually born again. So I'll have a nice metaphor there. Okay. But to the congregated people, he is a dancing immortal. I'm like, well, hang on. That's a metaphor as well. But we don't want to repeat the same technique. So I might go to my next one and see if it's different. They throng as if waiting for news from him, some word from the sky. Okay, so I have a few things there. I have personification of the sky, because the sky is talking. I have a simile, as if waiting. Okay. But I also have this technique called illusion, where you're making reference to another person, place, or thing. In this case, they seem to be alluding to some sort of god. Someone's talking to them from the sky. So what I think I'll go with is my metaphor up here. And I think I'll go with my illusion down here. Because if you notice, there's another thing that I can talk about here, is they seem to be referring to this immortal god-like status. So there's a link between him feeling like a god or an immortal and them thinking that he is that. Okay, so now I have to figure out my impact of these techniques. Now let's say we're struggling. I want you to get out your periodic table for your techniques, whatever you want to call it, your literary technique table, and go and find your metaphor and illusion and see what type of impact they're meant to have. And we are going for word meaning, I would think. Oh no, sorry, under the surface I think we're going with. So illusion is under the surface. So we're looking at what does an illusion do? Well, it creates some greater meaning past just the words on the page, that you have to look under the surface. So if we're alluding to a god, you need to think of all the things that we generally associate with a god. And then for tropes and figures, we have a metaphor. So one thing standing for another. Okay, and we have whatever the extra meaning is behind he's born again. In this case, the reanimation of life with every crossing, which also I guess has biblical allusion, but we'll forget that for now. Suggesting that whatever dies, whatever is extinguished, as the poem said, is rebooted and gives him perhaps another opportunity at life or another start at innocence, depending on how deep you want to go with your metaphor. So I head over here and I start writing my answer. Okay, 2 marks, 2 more sentences to get those marks. Now, if I'm really stuck and I still can't do it, get out your feel, think and learn cards, and you can have all of your language there to help you if you can't construct your sentence to help you. So I'm going to say, through the use of metaphor, then I'm going to quote my metaphor. That slash is because the poem went to a new line. Okay, so at this point I have named my technique and I have given my quote. Right. So as far as my jobs go, I have done my technique. I've given my example, so now I'm left with my explanation. So the impact of that technique on me. So the poet reveals the life-giving nature of the risky behaviour. But with every crossing he is born again. Maybe suggesting an underlying because the metaphor of being born again would suggest returning to innocence, to getting to a childlike status, to being able to relive everything again. So, an innocent okay. So then I have my explanation. Okay, so I've done my explanation. So then I go again. But now I have to link them because the question asked me for about the link between the two. So I would like to say, something to do with how this allusion to the god here, when we talk about the people watching the man, links to his need to return to innocence and being born again. and that the fact that he gets life from his risky behaviour. Okay, so I'll go down to the next line, but you could keep going. I'm just doing it because it's a little bit messy now. So the poet reveals a life. So creating a link between the actions and experiences of the persona and the collective experience of the crowd. Watching. The poet continues their motif of a godlike immortality, something like that. So I haven't really analysed anything yet, but I have said what the link is, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to name another technique in the process. So using meta language of English to be able to have more sophistication. So I'm just going to keep going now. So through the use of an allusion to a god, I have they throng as if waiting for news from him. Some word from the sky. Okay, so again, I have named a technique. I have given the example. So I've covered off two things. Now I'm back to my explanation again. Now I looked up allusion and it said there was something underneath the surface and all the connotations of those words. And I'm saying to myself, oh, I just don't know what to write next. So I'm going to grab my feel words. Does it provoke something? Does it evoke something? Empathize, sympathize, no, not really. Align, eject, yield, impose, maybe enrich. Maybe I could go with appreciate, or maybe I'm going to a think word, ruminate or ponder, perhaps. Okay, maybe I'm going to go with, I like ruminate and ponder, so I'm going to go with ponder. Okay, so through the use of an allusion to a god, blah, 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 the responder is positioned to ponder the same need for an otherworldly experience. Which is present for the collective as it is for the individual. And I might add a little bit there because I think you need to say while. No, sorry, do that. Say full stop. You could say the collective is represented, because we're always talking about what the poet is doing, not characters or personas. Represented as needing or wanting the individual to be a messenger. Through his experiences. Of being born again. Okay, so it probably went a little bit further than it needed to be honest, but let's see if we would get our marks. So I need to make sure that I've answered according to the rubric so that I don't just go off wherever I feel like it, that I've named a technique, that I've given examples, and I've explained the impacts of those techniques in it. And I've done it at least 2 times or 2 times to make sure that I am awarded the marks, or I give them enough information to gain the marks that I wish to get. So I have: the poet creates a link between the individual experience of the tightrope walking and the collective need to feel alive, revealing the paradox in human behaviour. Through the use of the metaphor, but with every crossing he's born again, the poet reveals the life-giving nature of the risky behaviour, suggesting an underlying need for the persona to return to an innocent, childlike status. And I'm going to add, because I've just reread my first sentence, and feel paradoxically feel alive after coming close to death. Okay. Creating a link between these actions and experiences of the persona and the collective experience of the crowds watching, the poet continues the motif of godlike immortality. Through the use of an allusion to a god, they throng as if waiting for news from him, some word from the sky. The responder is positioned to ponder the same need for an otherworldly experience which is present for the collective as it is for the individual. The collective is represented as needing or wanting the individual to be a messenger through his experiences of being born again. Okay. It doesn't go there, it goes there. Okay, so we have answered the question. We have enough information to be awarded the full marks. We have techniques and examples and explanations of those. And we have made sure that we have expressed what the link is, which makes that question a little more tricky than perhaps it could have been had that word not been there. So there are plenty of other answers to that question. The great thing about English is that there are multiple answers, so long as you prove what you are trying to say and back it up with your techniques and examples and your explanations, you should be fine. So, things to help you along. You've got your analysis reading paper cards, you have your language cards, oh, sorry about the light, and you have your literary technique table to use. If you're studying at home and you're getting stuck, take these things out, have them in front of you, use them as cues to help your brain calm down and the stress levels to decrease, and do things slowly. You will get better at it as you go along. Just take a deep breath and keep trying and get people to look over it as much as possible. If you want to request a different lesson, head over to the Ponder Realm on Facebook or on Instagram and shoot me a message, and I will get started on that one as well. Look for the next one on reflections and craft of writing. Okay, thanks. Bye.